Hey y'all, I'm Paige Feldman. I'm a writer and director of romantic comedies and regular comedies about love, sex, and anxiety. Today, I want to talk to you about Sundance. Now, I know a couple weeks back, I took you through the Sundance schedule and showed you how to navigate it, how to read it, to figure out maybe what kinds of films were in each section, what their screening times and locations meant for what the festival thought of them, what kind of reception they might be getting, all of that good stuff. But now, as of Sunday, January 29th, the festival is over. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get tickets to 4 films via Sundance's virtual festival ticketing program. So I watched these 4 movies in the comfort of my living room via this app. It's all very secure. It made me feel like I was at the festival. It even played the festival bumper beforehand and the land acknowledgement and all of these things that made me feel like I was sitting in the library or in the Eccles again. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I don't know if you could see. But it was really a phenomenal experience. It was amazing to be able to get to go back to Sundance after not having been for so long. This time just enjoying it as someone who loves films and as a filmmaker. And so today, I want to talk to you about these films that I saw as a filmmaker. There were 4 of them, like I said, and I just chose them based on, first of all, what was available, because there were some films I wanted to see that just weren't available virtually. But I just read the synopses and I chose 4 that really, I just felt like, wow, I want to see that. And all of them were phenomenal. I made great choices. And I'm not just paying lip service because I would say if I didn't like something, because sometimes there's something at Sundance that doesn't hit right. But these 4 films that I saw, I loved them all. Coincidentally, and I didn't even look at this metric, all 4 of them were directed by women. 3 of the 4 of them were both directed and written by the same woman. And based on names of the writers in that 4th film, where the director was not the same as the writers, 2 of the 3 writers, based on names, we're not going to assume gender here, but based on names, were women or non-male persons. I could be, it could be all 3, it could be 2 of 3. I'm not 100% sure, but based on the names, that's what's up. So it was really neat to be able to see so many films directed by women, and women who were making their feature debut or just their second feature. And also something interesting is that it seems like there's a huge industry trend for movies in theaters to be over 2 hours, like 2.5, 3 hours, 3 hours plus. I saw Babylon on Christmas Eve. That's over a 3-hour movie. These movies, all of them, were including credits under 2 hours running time. So it was nice to be able to watch films in the time period that you think of when you think of how long is a film. And nothing was over long. I was really impressed by how compact and tight and essential every scene was in these films. They were just incredibly well made, well written, well directed, well acted. So many feelings that I had. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna talk about these films individually, and I said I want to talk about them as a filmmaker. I'm gonna explain what that means. So I'm gonna go in the order of when I watched these films. There's no particular order beyond I watched the Starling Girl first, so that's the first film that's going. I'm gonna introduce it, give you a bit of a logline synopsis, the name of the writer, director, or the writing team and the director, and then talk to you about what my favorite part of the film was, and then what part of the film took me out of it that I thought I could improve. I feel very vain saying if I directed it, I would do this better, but it's important to me when I watch films to look for things that I could do as a filmmaker differently, or I would have done differently, so that I can have those thoughts and apply them to my own films. And then I'm going to talk about what I learned about each film from watching it, and also watching the Q&A afterwards, because that was really special too, is they had video Q&A with the director and the cast afterwards for each film. So I got to learn a little bit more about the process. So that's what we're gonna do. Gonna go through all these step by step, starting with, as I said, The Starling Girl. Now, The Starling Girl is written and directed by Laurel Parmet, and this is her first feature, and it's fantastic. It is about Jem, who is a 16-year-old girl in a very religious community. Think the Duggars, very like evangelical, strict, patriarchal, and she is in this youth group, and she leads a dance troupe in it, and is very content with her life and is a good girl. And then her youth pastor comes home from a mission trip in Puerto Rico, and feelings develop between them, and a relationship develops. And this film is about Jem coming to terms with her own desires not just sexual desires, but desires about what kind of life she wants versus the kind of life that's being foisted upon her within this community. The whole portrayal of this community was very respectful, despite it being about a young girl questioning how she belongs in it and whether the rules in this community are fair. The thing that just struck me so much about it, and the director Laurel Parmet talked about this in the Q&A, is that Jem has a ton of agency in this film. She gets into a relationship with her 30-something-year-old youth pastor, and yet you never feel like Jem is being taken advantage of in a way that would be on like an SVU episode. She is making these choices, as much as she's being manipulated into making these choices, as much as this relationship is wrong, she is also behaving as if this is her choice. She is not being pressured or forced. She has agency, and it's really just an interesting way to portray this kind of relationship. But that's not my favorite thing about it. My favorite thing about it is there is a surprise twist in the break into Act 3, which does play with Jem's sense of agency, which does play off of it. That twist, I thought I knew exactly where this movie was going because I've seen this kind of thing before. I'm trying not to spoil, but the religious group takes hold and the relationship is broken up, and then something happens right as Act 3 starts, and it shocked me, it shook me, it woke me up, and it made for a really satisfying and exciting ending, and also one that made me really feel morally conflicted about rooting for Jem and this youth pastor. It was a really interesting exercise in perspective. And the thing that took me out of it, though, is that during the sex scenes between Jem and Owen, the youth pastor, the lighting was incredibly dark. Everything was the same muddied shades of brown. That choice of the darkness and the brownness, that was, it was a choice that Laurel Parmet made when she was making the film, and I understand the desire to keep the sex scenes unsexy, and I understand if that was her intention. And I understand that aesthetically, because it was a very naturalistic look, they were really focusing on the natural beauty of Kentucky in a lot of the daytime scenes. So the brown and the monochrome-ish of these shots made sense within the aesthetic of the film, but it was so hard to see, and there just doesn't feel like there's much life in those shots. It took me out of it a little bit, so that is the thing that if I was making it, I would have changed it. I might have leaned more into blues, more into starlight, something that would reflect, so that, because I love seeing people's faces and seeing people's reactions and working with actors on their reactions is something I love. So that is what I would change. And then I've kind of given away the thing that I've learned and the thing that I've taken away from this film, but it's so hard to talk about the Starling Girl without talking about the point of view and the perspective and the importance of perspective within this story, because Jem's agency just shines through and makes me realize that this story could have been told from multiple perspectives. It could have been told from the youth pastor's perspective, and maybe seeing him as more of a predator, making me seeing him more love-struck in a way, or seeing Jem as a temptress, and he's questioning his own faith. Or it could have been seen from an omniscient point of view, which is what we most likely do, is just, here's a situation, let's lay it out in front of us, and we see Owen, the youth pastor, preying on Jem, and Jem we see her fear and her uncertainty because she doesn't really know much about sex or about any of those kinds of relationships and what the appropriate boundaries are for a pastor. And so we see her having feelings for him, but we're always at a distance. We always know that those feelings are wrong. And that kind of measured, almost anti-point of view perspective feels a little bit like Law and Order SVU or a network procedural, but this film plays it like a teen coming of age story, like a teen love story, a YA romance. And it's not that Owen is romantic, and it's not that we see him as this hero, because we don't. We know exactly what he's doing, and it feels wrong and feels kind of gross. But we also see what Jem sees in Owen. That dichotomy, it creates such a tension inside of you, inside of me when I was watching it, where I was at points both enthralled and disgusted and rooting for them, and then questioning what I was thinking. It was like it put me in Jem's headspace. And the other thing that I learned is during the Q&A after the film, Laurel talked about the importance of being vulnerable as a director, because she said that this film was based in part on a relationship that she entered into when she was young with someone in a position of power. She shared her experiences with her cast, and she shared them, obviously with the Q&A and with all of us, and I almost feel icky bringing it up, but she clearly wanted to send a message that sometimes things are complicated. And whether this action is objectively wrong or not, when she was in the situation, she felt empowered. She felt like she had agency, and she wanted to share that alternate perspective of her own experience, because it's so easy to just put everything into black and white boxes. And I respected her vulnerability in the Q&A, and the actors talked about how they respected her vulnerability within filming and within sharing these stories with them, because then they were able to trust her to open up and give their all to these performances, which, it's a difficult performance on both ends. To be someone like Eliza Scanlon, who played Jem as a young girl trying to be intimate with an older man, and then the man who played Owen, he seemed like a lovely person, and to have to be essentially a predator, that's rough. So that's what I learned. That's what I took away from The Starling Girl. Next, I watched Fair Play, which is written and directed by Chloe Domont. So Fair Play is a romantic, psychological thriller set in the finance world in New York City about two analysts who are at a top firm competing for an open, higher level position, and they are secretly in a relationship and secretly engaged. And when one of them gets the promotion over the other, their relationship begins to deteriorate in a really compelling and just visceral way. And my favorite thing about this film is, first of all, the look. It was super glossy and shiny and smooth, and everything you think is not indie film. When you think indie film, you think grain, you think weird aspect ratios, darkness and dull color, or super real color, shots that are framed in ways so that, I'm at the bottom of the screen and you can only see my eyes, or I'm so at the top of the screen you can just see my mouth, or I'm over here, or I'm over there. I can't move my head that far because there's a desk in the way. But this was it reminded me of the look of things like Basic Instinct and Fatal Attraction, though the plot does not go into that psychosexual thriller area. It doesn't go into this weird femme fatale place in that way. It's very much a true workplace thriller almost, which it's not made anymore, and that was awesome. And then secondly is that the ending, it goes way darker and weirder than I was expecting. And just like with The Starling Girl, that unexpected twist had me on the edge of my seat, had me holding my breath. It was really exciting. Now, what took me out of it? I thought long and hard, and I could not think of anything. The closest I got to it is that this film gets really intense and really uncomfortable in places because of the behavior of the two main characters, who are played by Phoebe Dynevor and Alden Ehrenreich. And that, it didn't take me out of it. It just made me feel really uncomfortable and made me want to stop the film. But I didn't, because I couldn't, because it was just so compelling and tense and just drove me down this rabbit hole. As far as what I learned from this film, the first thing is in the Q&A, Chloe Domont talked about intimacy coordination. She was asked about it because there were a lot of very intense sex scenes. And the thing that she talked about was, first of all, that intimacy coordination is great and really good to be able to have an intermediary to communicate with the director and with the actors in the scenes to ensure that everyone's boundaries are established and everyone feels comfortable. But she also said something that was equally important to her and Phoebe and Alden was their own intimacy with each other and their comfort levels with each other, which is something that obviously Laurel Parmet said when talking about The Starling Girl. And it was nice to hear all three of them discuss how their relationship with each other made intimacy coordination easier. And that's something that I find really interesting, because with my films, I'm going to need/want intimacy coordination for certain scenes. And I've been a little bit apprehensive about that, because I like to be pretty open and communicative with my cast. I like to, as part of the directing process, pause things and just have a chat for a little bit, get everybody comfortable in a headspace, laugh, feel good about being in the room working with each other. And I've been afraid that maybe intimacy coordination would mean I'd have to be a little bit more removed from the process. But hearing Chloe and Laurel talk about how important that familiarity and bond with the cast and that trust with the actors is to creating scenes that require them to be vulnerable, it helps me breathe a sigh of relief that I'll be able to do this and I'll be able to do it well. And then the other thing about Fair Play that I found really fascinating is that someone asked in the Q&A again about the tech speak, about all the finance speak that all of these people had to do, because it was kind of just like rhythmic gibberish to me. And it turned out that the cast felt the same way. Chloe had done her research and was able to say, all right, this is where you need to stress. These are the words that are important. This is what you need to say, and was able to tell them how to say these things so they sounded like finance bros. The thing that the actors were saying about this, and upon rethinking the whole movie after hearing this Q&A, it's totally true, is that the things that they were saying, that technical speak, it was important to get it right for verisimilitude, but the really important things that they had to concentrate on in those scenes were the relationships being built and how each of those sentences signified a certain level of deference to someone or a level of superiority over somebody. And getting those relationships right was the real meat of the thing. And so the thing that I take away from that, it's not just like technical speak doesn't mean anything, it's that the relationship is the most important thing in the film. And sometimes dialogue can get in the way of building a relationship. So you just have to remember the intention. And I have to remember the intention, which is helpful as I'm rewriting because I am cutting like 40 pages from my script right now. Next up, and the third film that I watched, was Fancy Dance, written and directed by Erica Tremblay, who is a writer on Reservation Dogs and is a Native woman. And this film is about two Native women, a woman named Jax, who is the aunt of Roki, and Roki's about 13 years old, so she's a teen girl. But it's also about Jax's sister and Roki's mom, who is missing. Jax is taking care of Roki while they're looking for her mom, and everyone knows except for Roki that her mom is probably dead. And that this film isn't a downer. This is a mystery about Jax knocking door to door and doing the detective work to figure out what happened to her sister. And about her taking care of Roki and passing on traditions to her and helping Roki get to the powwow. The powwow is happening for their tribe, and it's this big gathering with dance, and Roki says her mom has gone away before, but she's never missed a powwow. And so it's about Jax taking Roki to the powwow, and also Jax trying to find her sister, find out what happened to her. And it's a really intense and beautiful and culturally specific film. It's full of lightness and humor and really great, specific, interesting, different characters who I've never seen before. And not just because they're native. Like Jax is a grifter, and she's teaching Roki how to do some light stealing and like a hide the shell game. It's like it's called Find the Corn for money. So they're hustlers in like a very true sense of the word, not like YouTube bullshit. So my favorite part about this film, besides everything I mentioned already, because I loved the characters and I love their relationship, is the humor that they have, because the humor comes out of moments of seriousness, which is really interesting and fun and refreshing. And it also reminded me a lot of humor in my culture, in Judaism, where it's like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna, like, someone's dead. You can either cry or laugh, and at least laughter, you're having fun. And that's kind of the feeling that I got, but it's different. So I loved the jokes. Like, at one point, Roki gets put into the back of a police car while, ironically, an ICE officer checks Jax's papers. And Roki's just had her first period, and when Roki is let out of the car, Jax gets really mad at her about something. It's not about what she did, but it's about Jax's just general emotions running high. And after a second, Roki tells Jax, hey, guess what? I just bled all over the police officer's car. And it's hilarious. Speaking of like this cultural specificity, Erica Tremblay really weaves in the native language very well into the film. And there's just this air of authenticity there. And I feel like a dumb white girl saying this, but you can have something that doesn't feel authentic even done by people within a culture. But this feels like someone put their heart and soul and all of the things they love about being who they are into a film. And it was really, like, I'm getting goosebumps about it. It was a really wonderful, fun, like a really fun movie. It made me happy. And the only thing that took me out of it is that there's one character who's Roki's uncle. I couldn't quite figure out, like, if he was actually her uncle or if he was just like you call like your family friend Uncle Bob or whatever. His name wasn't Bob, but you call a family friend that. And then I figured it out. So it didn't really take me out of the story so much. It was just kind of a niggling question I had in the back of my mind. But clarity in relationships is important and is something that I need to make sure that I have, because I tend to, when I'm writing, start assuming that the audience knows everything. I assume the audience is smart, and then I forget that sometimes the audience isn't in my head, so I gotta clarify stuff. And the thing that I took away from Fancy Dance as a writer-director is the importance of cultural specificity and the ability to be able to immerse your viewer into the culture that you're exploring without pandering to them, without giving them the, like, WASP explanation, where it's just, yes, I know that most people aren't Jewish, aren't native, aren't black, etc. Here's your primer on the world. Enjoy. This film doesn't do that. You dive right in and you figure it out. And at one point, there is a white character who gets everything wrong, and Roki has to explain to her, like, why she's wrong. But Roki doesn't explain all that much. And at that point, we've known so much about the world that we're just cringing at this white lady being dumb, and we're on Roki's side already. We know what's up already because we've felt the emotions that the characters are feeling, and we know what's important to them and why. And finally, the last film that I watched at Sundance 2023 was Sometimes I Think About Dying. It was written by Stephanie Abel Horowitz, Kevin Armento, and Katie Wright Mead, and directed by Rachel Lambert. Now, Sometimes I Think About Dying is about a woman, Fran, who works in an office and just kind of goes home and microwaves something and puts cottage cheese on top and stares out the window and thinks about what it might be like to die. And she doesn't really say much. She doesn't really seem to have any friends. And then one day, a new guy comes into her office and makes a joke with her, and she decides she wants to try to be friends with him. And it's overall about the importance of human connection. And it's a really beautiful, simple story. And it's told really interestingly. It is a very modern film in a lot of ways, but it also uses the classic Hollywood film aspect ratio of 4:3, where, like, remember, like, the square-ish TVs, where it's not that big widescreen. It's more compact. It's like really, like, weird and wonderful and great. My favorite part about it is, first of all, there is this background office chatter that happens because a lot of the film is in the office. We're in kind of Fran's head in a way. We're just kind of staring over her shoulder, hearing what she's hearing, all of this. And in the background, you hear someone talk about how, like, oh yeah, I gave him that fan. I don't even know if it works. I haven't even figured it out yet. I got my steps goals. Oh, someone's bringing in donuts today. Like, the things you would hear at an office. And it is just so mundane that it's fantastic. And then there's a game of Mafia that is played later on at a house party. But it's not a regular game of Mafia, like where you're all sitting around in the circle. It's like hide and go seek improv Mafia, where you have to describe how you died when somebody finds you and kills you, or the murderer does. So a lot of just favorite things. There's just so much these moments of connection and all this joy within the film. It was just so apparent, and I loved each one of them. The thing that took me out of it was, by contrast, 3/4 of the way into the film, there was 5 to 7 minutes of Fran just laying around her apartment watching time pass by. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that as a choice. I just get impatient, and I don't like things that don't move or don't feel like they're progressing, even if they are going slowly. It's not the thing that I'm the audience for, and I don't know if I'd change anything if I was the I wouldn't direct this film. I think that's the first thing, is I know that this type of film, as much as I love things about human connection, this contemplative, slow film requires a patience and a way with pacing that is not the way with pacing that I'm good at. I need to be a much better, much different, much more versatile filmmaker to make this film. My type of pacing and rhythm is more about the active hits, the dialogue beats, the looks, the emotional states ping-ponging back and forth. And this is chill. But It's also, that part wasn't my thing. It didn't do it for me, but I appreciate it and understand why it was there. And I feel like cutting it a little bit shorter might actually take away from the movie in some respects. But then again, I would probably have just been like, 30 seconds, we're good, let's move on. But that's not what the director did. That's not what Rachel Lambert did. And I applaud her for creating her aesthetic, because it is very specific and different. And it did make me take notice. And it made me eventually just like watch, like, what am I missing? What don't I see here? And I didn't see anything. It was just stillness for a while. I hate meditation, so maybe that's why I didn't like it. And the thing that I learned, I think I probably learned the most from this film, just because it wasn't something like I would ever make, at least yet. The first thing is that form is so important. The 4:3 aspect ratio. The music was very traditional classic Hollywood. It had a Henry Mancini vibe, who, if you don't know him, Google Moon River, listen to that song. If you watch Breakfast at Tiffany's, he did the music for that. All this beautiful soaring score and this very classic aspect ratio juxtaposed with the modern office. That creates something that's just like weird and wonderful and different and interesting. And it made me sit up and pay attention. So thinking about how I can use form to my advantage to create something weird and make it feel maybe a little less weird, or take something really normal and make it feel like it's sitting in something different and more interesting than it actually is. Filmmaking isn't just about story. It's not just about visuals. It's about creating a mood and a place and like a portal to a world for people to go into. And what does that world look like? What are your references? That's really what I'm taking away. And the other thing is that the theme of this film, the little connections we build with people, it was just all over the place. And it was really subtle, except it also screamed out loud because everything was so in tune with the theme. And it did so in a way that made the relationship between Fran and her new coworker less critical and important. The film was all about finding connections everywhere and the interconnectedness of humans and the beauty of human relationships, romantic or otherwise. The more I talk about this movie, the more I like it, which is an awesome thing to feel. So those are the 4 films that I watched from Sundance 2023. The Starling Girl, Fair Play, Fancy Dance, and Sometimes I Think About Dying. Now, what I was hoping to do to finish this video was to recap all of the distribution deals that were made for these films, where they got sold, where they're going to be playing in the US. But strangely, only one film got a deal at Sundance. It was a really slow market. And that was Fair Play. It got bought for a whopping $20 million by Netflix, which I find really unfortunate, because this is the kind of movie that I feel like would do really well in theaters. It's not necessarily the traditional type of film that you'd go to watch in theaters because it has these big, beautiful visuals, but it's glossy and it's intense, and I wanted to pause it. I think it's doing a disservice to this film to put it on Netflix. I think that this film is not meant for streaming, it's meant for the theaters. And a film like Women Talking, for example, that's nominated for an Oscar this year, written and directed by Sarah Polley, is a very quiet, contemplative movie that's only available in theaters and is doing pretty well. I think Fair Play deserves its chance to be in theaters, to get people in a room together, feeling all of the emotions, the like tension and intenseness and all of it. So it's disappointing, and there's an article I'm going to drop into the description written by Owen Gleiberman at Variety that expands upon what are my feelings as well about that deal. But hopefully the Starling Girl, Fancy Dance, and Sometimes I Think About Dying will find their distribution sooner rather than later. When I was an exec, I would always scour the trades after the films had premiered, looking for reviews and looking for things that were getting snatched up. And the market is pretty slow this year, but hopefully in the coming days, more and more deals will be announced. So that's a wrap on my experience of Sundance 2023. As always, it was inspiring. It made me so excited to go out and make my proof of concept film for my feature that I'm writing. And yeah, that's all I got. I'll be back next week with more of Cake Fight Presents The Making Of. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.